Hey everyone, it's me. Okay, I'm gonna need you to shut up for a second, me from the past. So, this video was originally intended to be a review of all the patch 1.06 changes, being finished and published shortly after its release. But as the effort put into its edits and the amount of tangents in the video increased, that clearly wasn't going to happen. But at the very least, I could work peacefully knowing that it wouldn't take as much time as the developers would take for the next patch. But when I actually read those patch notes, the fact that many of the changes lined up undeniably with some ramblings we wrote half a year ago motivated me to switch gears onto getting a video out on that patch as soon as possible. Which I did, and even right now I'm working on making even more videos on that patch. However, I couldn't help but notice that I kinda just left the patch 1.06 video there without publishing it. Especially since I did technically finish the Great Weapon buff section of the video, with countless high effort visuals, data-driven explanations, and of course, necessary tangents lecturing you on design patterns and game mechanics. You know, all the usual stuff. And while patch 1.07 certainly warranted me adding some corrections and footnotes to this video, it still basically entirely applies and I think is really important to understanding how game-changing the buffs were in patch 1.06, and for understanding the numerous layers of mechanics that determine a weapon class's effectiveness. In regards to the other changes of patch 1.06, I still have a lot of the assets, visuals, and scripting done to make a video on them, but I'll probably not come back to them for a while due to conflicting priorities with the new patch. Anyway, that's enough disclaimers. Back to you, Amir. Hey everyone, it's Amir, and you've probably already heard the news about the new patch, but despite all the videos and explanations available, you may struggle to find detailed information on how a lot of these things changed. How much further exactly does light rolling take you? What do they mean with their description of the Rivers of Blood changes? How exactly does Bloodhound Step work now? How much fewer iframes does it have? These are still unanswered questions. As it turns out, it's far more complicated than simply tuning a number or two on many of these elements. It appears instead that they've taken their time to complete the quality reworks that these elements deserve. And to match that quality, I'm going to be taking the time today to show you how they went about doing this, especially with the more problematic and infamous ones. But overall downwards adjustments are not the only thing that we'll be covering in detail. One big subject of this video is the myriad of changes, some being unannounced, to the various great weapon classes. With the vague language in the patch notes, you may wonder, which moves got speed improvements, and where? What parts of the recovery got improved? Are unique attacks of some of these weapons included? All this, and a whole lot more, answered in this video, with data to back it up. To go about this, we're going to be going over each line of the balance section in Elden Ring's 1.06 patch notes, and be giving an appropriately nuanced explanation, breaking down what the described changes actually mean. After that, we'll also break down what we know about the new summon sign and invasion map-wide matchmaking, and go over what exactly changed with many of the listed bug fixes. If you'd like to see more data mining and in-depth Souls content like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss these kinds of videos. I've also provided timestamps so the video is easier to navigate, and with that said, let's get into the changes. So, starting with the first balance change, they've stated they made some adjustments to greatswords, curved greatswords, and great hammers. Officially, they state that they've reduced the time it takes for rolling to become possible after an attack, clarifying that jump attacks, dual-wield attacks, and horseback attacks are not included. On top of this, they state that they've increased the motion speed of strong attacks and charge attacks. They also state that they've increased the guard counter's motion speed for these weapons. We'll explain what motion speed refers to in a second. They then go on to state they've made similar changes for great axes, but with the additional point that they've increased their attack speed overall. So since all these issues are related, we are going to start by going into detail on them as a group to show you exactly what changed. We'll be starting with the first point, reduce the time it takes for rolling to become possible after an attack. As it turns out, this is not telling the full story, and is in fact severely underselling what they've changed. While the cancel window for dodging happens earlier in most of these attack animations, that is not the only thing they've improved. In many of these animations, the cancel speed into right-hand attacks, left-hand attacks, weapon skills, guarding, crouching, jumping, weapon switching, and even movement got improved. One rather consistent factor is the worse the cancel windows were, the more correction that attack got. For example, the Greatsword's first one-handed light attack got tremendously buffed with a 5-frame improvement to dodge and fast weapon arc cancels. which is used by skills like Raptors and Quickstep. But even more dramatic is the 4th attack in the chain, which got improvements across the board. Another good example is the Greatsword one-handed running light attack, which got between a 4 and 7 frame boost to cancel speeds across practically every action cancel except for plane movement. Across all these changes though, there are a few that are exceptionally notable, and some that even got an unannounced speed boost to the startup of their animation. And no, I'm not talking about the heavy attacks, but we'll get to them later. The unique light attack moveset shared by the Knights, Banished Knights, and inseparable Greatswords have been given a speed boost that has decreased its first light attack startup by 2 frames, and got a significant dodge and fast weapon art cancel speed increase. The subsequent attacks did not get sped up, but received lighter adjustments on the same cancel windows. That might not seem like a lot, but as it turns out, these adjustments were all it needed to turn into a pretty nutty weapon. This weapon already had a few true combos on it, and while some people thought it was directly made to be more consistent by some of the recovery changes, it wasn't actually. The attack chain speed between the moves of all its known true combos hasn't changed. It's just the weapon is overall better offensively and defensively, increasing the amount of scenarios where you'd get the positioning to execute its true combos. The reason for these true combos, and also why these improvements to the weapon are able to take it so far, is the second light attack that's been here since day 1. It has a 15 frame attack startup, which for reference is the same speed as this attack or this attack. This makes pseudo combos with this moveset very effective, as players may mistake any sort of sudden animation from you for your fast follow-up, which causes them to be roll caught. The third attack in the chain is even stronger, hitting in just 12 frames, which is the speed of this attack for reference, or this attack. But since it's locked behind 2 attacks, you'll likely find less opportunities to utilize it. However, these true combos are likely unintentional, which I almost neglected to mention because I kinda wouldn't mind if they stay, seeing the depth they add to the weapon, while clearly not breaking the game. So, sorry if this video ends up being the reason that gets corrected, but if they do, I know they're watching my videos. So, hi from SoftDev. In regards to the Greatsword moveset, it seems most light attack moves were given just dodge cancel speed improvements and sometimes light attack cancel speed improvements, improving the speed that you can chain light attacks. For the most part though, the overall recovery changes were mostly reserved for high commitment attacks like the heavy attacks. But that is unlike what they did with the Curved Greatswords. The Curved Greatsword class already had a pretty solid light attack set that when used right could even mix up experienced players for playing predictably, unlike the Greatsword, which felt much more limited in terms of mobility. Let me tell you the changes of the first two-handed light attack. You could continue the chain 2 frames faster, dodge 3 frames faster, weapon art 5 frames faster, and block cancel 5 frames faster. What is also worth noting is the weapon switching speed was also improved by 3 frames, which also happens to use the same window that crouching and jumping utilize. This attack was barely the only one to get across the board changes, as subsequent attacks, running, and especially the rolling attack got some hefty buffs as well. Seriously, try this weapon class out. It's probably in the best state it's ever been throughout the series. Also, here are just a few of the countless roll catch combos that are possible with the Curved Greatsword, some of which have been enabled or reinforced by the new patch. Let's move on to the subject of Great Hammers. Now, Great Hammers had a similar adjustment pattern to that of the Greatswords, in that primarily the dodge recovery was what vastly improved on all but the highest commitment moves, at least on the one-handed moveset. On the two-handed moveset, it got changes similar to that of the Curved Greatsword, gaining cancel speed improvements across the board. The two-handed moveset also saw the greatest dodge cancel speed improvement of any neutral light attack changed in this update, an improvement of a whopping 8 frames, which was necessary to bring its dodge cancel speed on par with other great weapon classes. Otherwise, I would say this moveset is pretty solid, except for its relatively slow running attack. But it's worth mentioning that this great weapon has much stronger poise than all others, granting 62 poise, or at least it was. As of patch 1.07, its new base innate poise value is 72 poise. However, this is effectively a nerf of its poise versus basic attacks and spells, due to the universal patch 1.07 poise damage buffs I explained on my video of the new PvP exclusive scaling, granting 62 poise, which is actually quite noticeable, compared to other great weapons that end up lowering your effective poise instead of increasing it the moment you reach 60 armor poise. Oh yeah, you didn't know that? Well, too bad, I'm gonna have to talk about it in a later video. If that video isn't out yet by the time you're watching this, then I'd have to recommend Illusory Wall's general video on Elden Ring's poise system, where he briefly touches on the topic. Overall, it's a great video, and I'm glad I was able to—
Amir for showing me this calculator.
What was that he just said? Amir? Great axes. So, due to that poise thing I mentioned, great axes were kinda just a worse great hammer before this patch. Less poise damage, worse moveset. It also didn't have any of the perks that other great weapons had, such as counter thrust hits on great spears and great swords, or the horizontal coverage of curved great swords. Thankfully, the developers picked up on this and decided to substantially improve it. Nearly every move on this class got a startup speed boost, ranging from 1 frame on the standing attacks to 3 on the running attacks. Many attacks also had their recovery vastly improved across the board, especially into subsequent light attacks, granting it far more attack pressure. These changes have largely made up for the weapon class's inherent weaknesses as a primarily vertical swinging moveset, as vertical swings, unlike thrusting or horizontal attacks, spend most of their initial hitbox period over the user's head, making the effective hitbox startup speed slower than it would appear in the data. Vertical attacks also suffer more from tracking limitations, as most attacks in Elden Ring have their tracking deactivated right before the hitbox activates. But for vertical attacks, this is effectively a few frames before they can actually hit an upfront opponent, unlike thrusting attacks, which immediately hit in front and thus are largely not limited by tracking. It's also worth mentioning that due to these mechanics, these attacks are especially vulnerable to the unintended aim punch glitch I mentioned in another video, which causes attacks to swing off course when poising through another attack. This is something I'd like From Software to take a closer look at, as they've gotten it right before with attacks like the Zweihander heavy attack in Dark Souls 3. But again, a discussion of tracking balance is something best reserved for another video. To return to the changes, the buffs have also reinforced the class's anti-air capabilities, as its attacks have already had a lot of active frames to hit opponents going over the user's head, unlike great hammers, which are far less effective at this. However, aside from what I've already mentioned, there are still some shortcomings of the moveset that should be looked at to put it more on par with similar classes. The rolling attack in particular I think needs to be looked at for further adjustments, as the one-handed version strangely has its tracking end 4 frames early, while the two-handed version has its tracking stop right before the hitbox begins, like most standing attacks. To my surprise, either due to FromSoft catching it themselves or someone sending in a ticket, this got fixed in patch 1.07. It could also use a frame or two of speed increase to put it more on par with similar rolling attacks, as right now it's not much better than the standing attack, decreasing its defensive capabilities as a rolling attack. The running attack was also unintentionally nerfed in a way due to this patch, as its effective tracking was reduced because most of the animation where the tracking is available was sped up. Tracking works off events that set the animation's turn speed in degrees per second for that part of the animation, and when that part is sped up, the tracking speed is not automatically adjusted. If you run away from a lock-on target and press attack, you can clearly see that most running attacks have far more tracking than it does now. With the tracking issues on the other attacks I already mentioned, this further makes the class vulnerable to strafing or missing due to horizontal motion. But yeah, overall the changes for the Great Axe are amazing and make it far more fun to use. In particular, I recommend you try the Pickaxe, which is technically a Great Hammer despite using the Great Axe moveset. This gives the full benefit of Great Hammer poise while having a better moveset and counter thrusts, as the weapon purely does thrust damage. This makes it arguably the best in class, and works wonders with predictively trading with opposing attacks that you can hyper armor through, and possibly counter. It gives you a preview into what we might get with other great weapon classes with a poise rework, which again will be talked about in a future video. Now that we got all the changes to the basic attacks of these weapons down, it's time to move on to the speed increases to their guard counters and heavy attacks. The weird thing about this though is the inconsistent language, as they refer to the speed increases of these as motion speed increases, but for Great Axes they said attack speed. It would be helpful in the future if they use consistent language that could be broken down into more technical lingo by the community, instead of people needing to data mine to find out what actually changed. Maybe it's because they thought attack speed would communicate both the increased cancel speeds into other attacks and the increased animation startup speed of Great Axes. On further observation, post-patch 1.07, they've been using far more consistent language and have even used community terms to refer to some things, such as stamina damage and poise damage. At least, that appears to be the case if you get your patch notes from the Bandai Europe site. It looks like the people at Bandai put in a lot of effort into their translations to make the patch notes more understandable for the English-speaking community. However, they aren't perfect, as it turns out the inconsistent use of motion speed versus other terms is only present in the English patch notes. If you look at the Japanese, they use the exact same term for every instance of an animation speed modification. This goes for the other terms as well, such as ease of breaking the enemy's stance, being consistently used to refer to poise damage. But yeah, I just wanted to go into this quickly, as the confusion I displayed at the beginning of the video has been cleared since I discovered this. In regards to the actual changes, every guard counter of the great weapon classes listed in this patch got a 2 to 6 frame animation speed increase to the start of their animation, increasing the effective speed, hyper armor startup, and total recovery. But don't be mistaken, this does not mean you'll be able to guard counter out of every guard stun in every interaction. In fact, I'd say it would only work in circumstances where you have enough time to hyper armor their fastest follow-up attack, such as something like a straight sword running light attack into a standing light attack. Oh yeah, and as it turns out, guard counter hyper armor only provides 50% of your weapon's base poise health, while still having your passive poise. So don't be expecting to poise anything with the lightest attacks in the game. What's more interesting is the animation speed improvements of these weapon classes' heavy attacks, as each of them don't just have one set of heavy attacks, but often numerous unique variants across different member weapons. Every single heavy attack across all 4 of the weapon classes specified, great swords, great hammers, curved great swords, and great axes, got speed improvements. One-handed or two-handed, first or second, it didn't matter, they gave every single one a significant improvement. Except for the second Flamberge heavy attack for some reason. Oh, and don't forget two-handed pickaxe. In terms of what parts of these animations they sped up, they never sped up the actual release of the attack, instead speeding up either the startup before the charging portion, or both. What does that even mean? Well, we'll have to talk about the mechanics of heavy attacks for a second. Heavy attacks work off 2 animations, the full charge attack animation and the release animation. During the period of the full charge animation that the character is visibly charging or winding back the weapon, there is usually an event that grants the player a special effect that acts as the charging window. The effect only persists as long as this event is active. If the player releases their heavy attack input at any point during the charging window, the player action script code plays the matching release animation, which is designed to start from the charging position and does an often visibly and audibly lighter attack, which is obviously done to match the fully charged attack's increased attack properties in every department. The uncharged release animation also often has less forward momentum, weaker tracking, and in some cases performs fewer swings, strikes, or thrusts than the fully charged variant performs. From the point of releasing a charge, the release animation startup is usually faster than a weapon's first light attack from neutral, allowing the user in theory to use it to mix up their opponent with different variable attack timings better than using their light attack from neutral can. However, in reality, you'll unfortunately find that this is almost never the case. Due to numerous factors, heavy attacks are almost always less safe and net less rewards than every other attack type, no matter how skilled the user. There are a few exceptions, such as the Claymore's heavy attack, which has a fairly okay charge startup, and a very fast attack startup on the charge release. It also has great forward motion on the release as well, so it partly makes up for the fact that starting a heavy attack means your opponent might be able to space you out easier while you're immobile. Many heavy attacks have similar strengths and could be usable, or even meta, but are unfortunately held back by numerous limiting factors, such as limited tracking, high charge startup time, lack of forward momentum, slow release speed, thin hitboxes, and limited attack reach. With that understood, back to the adjustments of these heavy attacks. It seems that the animation speed-ups were intended primarily to standardize the time that it would take to hit with a fully charged attack. Despite the fact that the fully charged attack startup of these attacks ranged wildly, all of them now fall under a range of about 37 to 42 frames, with like 1 or 2 outliers. That amounts to about a second and a third in real time. Since a lot of these involve speeding up the period of the animation before the charge window, this also decreases the effective startup time of an uncharged attack as well, at least from neutral. In some rare cases, the speed up also covers a bit of the frames after the charge window ends. So that in a way decreases the release attack startup, in the sense that the attack hits faster post the period where you can no longer alter the timing of the attack. The faster the attack startup in a release animation, or in the part of the full charge animation after the charge window, the more difficult it is for even experienced players to react to and appropriately roll the attack. Despite the lack of animation speed on the side of the release animations, it still had a significant impact on their effectiveness. Besides intuition, players initially don't know for sure when the attack is going to come out, and thus what is the appropriate time to roll the attack. And many heavy attacks are easily mistaken for a weapon's light attack variant, which do demand your full attention to respond to appropriately. This isn't to say slow release speeds do not limit a weapon's effectiveness, it's just that a reactable release animation doesn't automatically make a heavy attack useless. Like you can see from the numerous clips I've shown using the Moonlight Greatsword, despite the fact that the release speed is still about 2/3 of a second, the increased startup speed improves the chances of landing it significantly. With these speed increases and recovery improvements, I think we can say for sure that heavy attacks are now far more viable, at least outside of competitive duels. Still, I think more adjustments could be made for heavy attacks as a whole, such as increasing their synergy with light attacks, as doing a heavy attack after a light attack often has a huge unnecessary delay in comparison with the cancel speed into other light attacks. One suggestion I'll lay out more clearly in another video, and one that we've already laid out in an article on our feedback website, is to make inputting heavy attack after your first light attack utilize the second heavy attack animation, similar to how pressing light attack after the first heavy attack uses the second light attack animation. I mean, just look at this. Like, it's almost as if the game was originally designed with this intended. Even if there are a few that this wouldn't fit for, the devs can easily implement this on a case-by-case basis. They've already done so for countless other special transitions in the game, such as light attacks after a running attack, light attacks after weapon skills, and much, much more. But with that said, that's my summary of the Great Weapon moveset buffs of patch 1.06. Now, to move on to light roll. Whoa, not so fast, Amir from the past. Yeah, like I said at the beginning of the video, due to recent events, this video was only able to cover those changes. So, all that info will have to be explained in a different one sometime in the future. But hey, maybe that won't be so far away with how much more efficient I've been getting at doing this YouTube thing. And if you want to help me with that YouTube thing, be sure to subscribe with notifications, join the community Discord,
¿Qué pasa?
follow my Twitter as I'm using that a lot more, and subscribe to my Patreon if you would like to join the lovely people on screen. Thanks for watching all the way through, and appreciating my content. See you guys later.